We are live. Sam, it's been a while.
It
I feel
has been
like
a
it's been
while.
a long while since we've done this, and I'm pumped. I'm
I'm
fired up
excited.
to be back.
I'm excited. I feel like we haven't done anything. Well, obviously when Chris with club season. So, but to have kind of you and I, like, yeah, I'm excited.
I know. The gang's back together again.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, on this episode, I wanted to talk about how things are changing. There's a lot of things that are happening kind of quietly right now. Um, and I wanted to talk about how it's going to impact recruiting, I think, in a positive and maybe not so positive way for the next few years. But I thought we'd just dive in and talk about this 5-and-5 eligibility shift, this proposal that really could change a lot that happens with recruiting timelines. And a lot of families don't know that this is even being talked about and this is happening. And so I thought we'd get right into it. So this, just for you all to be aware, this 5-and-5, basically the NCAA is considering 5 seasons of eligibility within 5 years, making the COVID bonus year model really permanent. So if you all remember watching over the last few years, watching a lot of college matches, you would hear, the infamous super senior. I don't know if you all remember that in the previous years, but the announcers would talk about the super senior.
Yes. Yeah. The super senior. And then I think also the whole 5-and-5 piece too is another upcoming. If you all watch college football and you follow the Vandy quarterback who came from a JC and his lawsuit and wanting to keep having his eligibility, and there's other lawsuits that are still going, like other players. I know there's one, Texas A&M, actually men's basketball as well. He's able to practice for the moment and play until anything else happens. So yeah, so of course the NCAA was like, all right, what are we going to do? And this giving everybody 5 years basically is it's coming. On the D2 side, it's happening. It's going to be officially voted on early next year. But I can tell you from talking to D2 coaches, I just talked to Tracy Dahl from Cal Poly Pomona. That is, she is moving ahead, knowing that some of her players could stay for a fifth year, hands down. And Lord knows I would want Sarah to stay for her fifth year after 45 kills last week in her match, by the way. So congrats to her, because that's a pretty phenomenal. I'm sure if you're the 6'11 player at Barry in Florida, Leonine wants her to be sticking around for 5 years as well. And then on the D1 side, you and I have both been hearing from coaches, and that this has been coming down the pipeline, but that this is, the understanding I'm getting is that it's happening on the D1 side and will be in full effect here, as we'll know for sure here early next year as well, basically.
Yeah, when the Pitt coaches were in town, obviously we went to go
Yes.
see SMU and Pitt play, and really good to see Kellen and Fish. And Fish is like, "What do you think?" It's looking like it's happening, looking like it's going to happen. And I think, I think for families just to start being aware, during COVID, there were some really sad phone calls that players got that, hey, we don't have your spot, or we don't have, money for you. We anticipated,
Mm-hmm.
having money, but so and so decided to stay. And so now this spot is, no longer available. And I think with the roster limits, being at 18, it's going to be interesting to see. I really think they're going to keep the roster caps at 18 just because of how much money is on the line. And so with only having 18, there's bound to be those phone calls of players that thought that they had a spot, and then all of a sudden somebody decides to stay. It'll be interesting to see how different coaches manage those conversations. But I don't know, Sam, you were a college coach for 20 years. If you had a player, like a Sarah or like a Harper Murray, or, these players that are just crushing it and delivering it for their program, and they say, hey, coach, I want to stay.
You're finding a
You're,
way. Come on now, let's be real. You're finding a way. Like, you absolutely, if it is feasible for your kid to stay around, first off, let's be real. A lot of the kids want to play. Like, they're not ready to get into adulting. To be honest. And maybe they're at an institution where they're going to get their undergrad and then can start their master's. Why wouldn't you? So, especially, it's some great, like a lot of places. Absolutely. It's just that I want to do this. Let's go, hands down. And, going back to your point about how, coaches are going to manage this, we had with the roster limitations for schools that are opting in. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the settlement piece here as well today. But we had to deal with that with a couple of our kids, that coaches were just being very proactive because they knew their schools were opting into the settlement, and our kids had to go to plan B or plan C. Now, it all worked out for them, fortunately, at the end of the day. But that's I think there's this education piece, which is why we're talking about this, because those are the things that coaches are going to have to be way more proactive versus reactive, and way more communicative and sooner rather than later. And that's a conversation I had with Tracy about that yesterday, for sure.
Yeah, I think for the college coaches, just being really in touch with their athletes to understand what their intentions are. But as we know, things can change. And I would have to imagine that when you have a player that you've established and built a really good relationship with over the years, that's continuing to deliver, even if they had anticipated, graduating and moving on, um, their minds can change at the end of the day, and they could say, you know what, I thought about it and I decided I want to stay. And again, I can't imagine. I know coaches are going to have those really difficult conversations. And it's going to be devastating for a lot of people. And one of the things that we always talk about, as we help athletes through the process, is never burning a bridge, making sure that you really work hard to develop relationships across the board, and essentially maintain those relationships. Be thankful, show gratitude when you've made up your mind and made your decision. Pick up the phone and call coaches. Don't send emails. Like, I think that the importance of really managing those relationships over time is going to be extraordinarily important. I almost feel like for us, in terms of advising, having those players drop a positive note or two to, coaches, even when they've decided that, they've made up their mind, but they're following what's happening in the season, just to say, hey, see, you guys are crushing it, and it's so great to see you, all in action. And I'm still rooting for your program. I really think that the importance of staying in close communication with people for longer is going to be important.
I think that's always been important. I mean, I know for me, when I was coaching, like when kids would tell me no, like I had this process of how I had to let that go, in terms of just like, okay. But I always, like, there were certain kids that you just knew, like, if something changed, let me know, or you changed your mind. And then you ended up getting the kid, and that happened for sure. And that was due to that relationship piece. So I do think that that's really, we talk about that as being a pivotal piece in this journey, also because there's coaching changes that take place, and people go to new places, and having to manage the recruiting side at their new institution, for example. So I do think that matters, because you don't know, like, what if things can change, and if you were in that running and you were in that final group, and then something happens, changes, but you haven't made a final decision because you're being patient to make sure that you're finding that right fit, something, it could come up, and you didn't, it's going to be an offer potentially that you didn't have 6 months ago, for example.
Well, I think one thing that we're going to start to see is there's going to be much smaller recruiting classes over the next few years, maybe, 2 to 3 freshmen instead of 5, or even bringing 6 players in. I think we're going to see, fewer athletes coming in. And then obviously with the portal, which is continuing to wreak havoc for, the underclassmen. I know one of the things that we've talked about and really observed is, coaches really not necessarily developing players the way they used to, really finding players that are a little bit more ready to come in and to compete in the program. I think that's one of the trends, or one of the things that I'm really seeing is, you know, coaches feeling like they're getting burned, and bringing somebody in, developing them, and then as they develop and get better, getting poached by another program. And we know it's happening. We
Sure.
hear what's happening, and especially with NIL money, players being approached and talked to and told, hey, we've got this deal over here. So I think that's going to continue to be interesting. Overall, how it impacts recruiting. I think there's just going to be a lot fewer spots here over the next 4 or 5 years that we have to work through this, whatever it goes into effect, right? Because we still
Sure.
don't know. They're
Yeah.
going to vote on it, but is it going to be for the class of 26? Does it start in the class of 27? And
I think on the D2 side, they're expecting it for the fall of 26 to be in effect. That's what my understanding is. Now, of course, like you said, will it be 26, the 26-27 academic year, or does it go to the 27-28 academic year for sure? But it's coming. And then I think going on to that roster piece is the other piece that's coming into play is besides like 5 years of eligibility, which, again, we've been talking about that. That's related to D1 and D2. There's nothing on that on the table. D3, as far as my understanding there for sure. Obviously, NAIA is going to continue to do their thing, and obviously, junior colleges will, continue to do their thing. And obviously, there's changes that are happening at JCs in different sports because of all this that is happening. Coaches, football is a great example to use in that scenario of, you know, kids going here before they go transfer to a big P4 school, for example. So I think we're going to continue to see that happen for sure. We'll see it happen on the volleyball side. There's amazing JC programs out there that, are developing some great kids, and then the opportunity to transfer into that 4 years, 4-year institution, and now have up to 5 years, which is amazing, basically, at the end of the day. The other thing that I think is happening more and more too, conversations that I've had with coaches, is that coaches are waiting to hear from admin. And this is at different levels for the right. This is at all levels, is how many are you going to have on your roster? And what is that going to look like moving forward? So, you've seen some teams with some massive, massive rosters. We know some schools in the Midwest like to have a varsity and a JV team. I just talked with the head coach from Waldorf, for example. She's at 29 as of right now on her roster. It's a varsity and a JV situation, but still a lot of kids, when you're managing practice, et cetera, all that. But I'm starting to hear from the D3 side, D2 side this fall is that they're going to hear from their admin as to, are they going to stick at certain roster limits and impose roster limits by the institution? And I'm sure for some schools that is a financial piece that's coming into play right now. And we've seen that, over the years here as well. And obviously, unfortunately, with some schools that have had to close since COVID, et cetera, as well. So,
yeah, back in the day, like a long time ago, UCLA men's program used to have a bunch of extra kids that they would help, get into the school, and they would be able to use volleyball as a leg up to get in. They wouldn't be on the roster, but they would be in. That's one thing that I think could be interesting to see what happens is, do you end up having more of a practice squad? Are you bringing some other players in that could potentially be on a practice squad that might be, that old walk-on mentality, but they wouldn't suit up, obviously, and
yep.
be on the roster and be able to travel, but just being there, being, at part of the practice squad. And does that become, essentially a red shirt situation, because they're also talking about the red shirt really being gone, that you're going to have your 5 years and
Yeah,
then your
that's
5 years is it.
correct. Correct.
Except the medical red shirt,
Medical,
right?
the medical red shirt wouldn't go away. I don't see how that could go away. So I think that still would be on the table. But just in general, yes, the 5 years would replace, in essence, having that, if you, the red shirt for sure.
Mhm.
So,
Well, we'll keep you guys in the loop and let you know what we hear. I think, as you go through this recruiting process, families just need to know and understand that opportunity is there, but not necessarily going to be where it used to be. And so, ensuring that you take your time in the process, you make sure that you feel, that you're finding the right fit here, that it's the perfect fit. Um, as perfect as it can be, there's always going to be something that isn't necessarily going to be,
correct.
the,
But we
the
want to,
best.
yeah, checking off as many of the boxes as possible for sure, as I like to say. And I think that as you go through, like, you know, um, if you have to, like, I think we have these conversations with our kids and making sure that, with stuff that's going on like this, asking the questions too, like, what does that look like? And, so we can have a better idea, or those are the questions we're going to be asking. And, again, like I mentioned, Cal Poly Pomona, talked to, another D2 school that's dealing with, figuring out what's going to happen, what roster limits for their program moving forward, and waiting on that answer, and hopes to have that answer by the end of the season, basically, at the end of the day. So, a lot of that, I think it's important, like, you have to have that big picture of what's going on. And coaches sometimes are, unfortunately, waiting on admin, and admin doesn't always have the answers. They might be waiting for somebody else. And that can get frustrating in this whole process too, at the end of the day.
Yeah, sometimes, I don't always think that coaches do the best job at communicating and being fully transparent, and maybe just not knowing what it is that they want to share. But it would be great to have some more transparency as, you're recruiting and going through this process, to be able to, clearly communicate that we're waiting to hear. We don't have answers. And as soon as we know, then, we'll be able to communicate that with you. And in the meantime, this is where you are on our list. I always think that's so important for a player to know. I definitely think that it's a question that, you should be asking when you're going through the process. If you've had multiple conversations with a coach, I certainly wouldn't open up with where am I on your list. But
Right.
as you've had that opportunity to start building a rapport, building a relationship, and staying in consistent communication, at a certain point, you can certainly ask those kinds of questions to just try and understand, what does your timing look like? What are you hoping for here? And maybe, having a better understanding of what that coach is going through if they're not communicating, with you, and just being open about it.
And then, yeah, to add on to that, I think, you know, um, I know coaches sometimes have an idea in their mind of what their timeline looks like. It doesn't always happen that way. It's kind of like going to a doctor's office, as I experienced earlier today. You think you're going to be back within an hour, and you're still waiting in the waiting room an hour and 5 minutes later to go back, basically. So, just think about that. Like, oh, I'll be back with you in a couple minutes. Well, if you really need 30 to 60 days, just say, like, this is where we're at right now. And that's fair. Like, at the end of the day, same thing of telling kids thanks but no thanks as well. That coaches need to be better at, for sure. Like, and listen, you could change your mind. I certainly did when I was coaching. You thought you didn't, but then things changed, and I would reach back out to see, like, hey, where are you right now? What's going on? I appreciate when coaches reach out. Hey, this has changed. So and so still available, or what do you have? That piece too, with all that is going on in the world of college athletics, I would love to see get 1% better too.
Mm-hmm. Are we sending the dentist a bill for your time this morning?
I
Because
they were
they have no problem billing us for theirs. I'm just
Oh, I
wondering
know.
if.
Well, I didn't have to pay anything, so that was good because it was all part of the surgery when I had it, or the procedure as a little surgery like 3 months ago. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's like, can I have that hour back? Joking. Just joking.
Are we are we making our way back into the recovery? Are we
Yeah,
doing
everything's good. Everything I passed. So now it's next step. I go to the regular dentist here in, I don't know, a week and a half because I'm due for the regular dentist, and then we'll get everything good to go.
I like it. Chris
So
went to the dentist yesterday.
did he have fun?
He loves the dentist. They talked actually about, I guess she has kids that go to Wakeland High School, and Chris was showing her a video of a kid that we just featured from Wakeland, Hannah Lee, and
Yeah.
then was teaching some about, and she did not know they had a volleyball program, and he's like, "Oh, well, they won state last year.
They're pretty good.
They're actually pretty
They're
good.
pretty good. Yeah.
They're not super medium. They're
Not.
actually
No.
pretty good."
No.
So they chit chatted a little bit about volleyball, and she was happy to hear that Wakeland has a good volleyball team. So
Yeah. There we go.
it was good.
I like it.
Sweet. All right. Well, it really wraps up our topic for today. Next week we're gonna dive into some more fun and exciting news, be following things that are happening in the industry and bring them to you. And
Yeah.
as always, chit chat and have a little fun with this. Bring on some guests and rock and roll.
Keep the topics coming for sure. So
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, and we will see you next time.
have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.